1994, I walked into a prison in Cambodia, and I met a 12-year-old boy who had been tortured and was denied access to counsel. And as I looked into his eyes, I realized that for the hundreds of letters that I had written for political prisoners, that I would never have written a letter for him, because he was not a 12-year-old boy who had done something important for anybody. He was not a political prisoner. He was a 12-year-old boy who had stolen a bicycle. What I also realized at that point was that it was not only Cambodia, but of the 113 developing countries that torture, 93 of these countries have all passed laws that say you have a right to a lawyer and you have a right not to be tortured. And what I recognized was that there was an incredible window of opportunity for us as a world community to come together and end torture as an investigative tool. We often think of torture as being political torture or reserved for just the worst. But in fact, 95% of torture today is not for political prisoners. It is for people who are in broken down legal systems. And unfortunately, because torture is the cheapest form of investigation, it's cheaper than having a legal system, cheaper than having a lawyer and early access to counsel, it is what happens most of the time. I believe today that it is possible for us as a world community, if we make a decision to come together and end torture as an investigative tool in our lifetime. But it will require three things. First is the training, empowerment, and connection of defenders worldwide. The second is ensuring that there is systematic early access to counsel. And the third is commitment. So in the year 2000, I began to wonder, what if we came together? Could we do something for these 93 countries? And I founded International Bridges to Justice, which has a specific mission of ending torture as an investigative tool and implementing due process rights in the 93 countries by placing trained lawyers at an early stage in police stations and in courtrooms. My first experiences, though, did come from Cambodia. And at the time, I remember first coming to Cambodia, and there were, in 1994, still less than 10 attorneys in the country because the Khmer Rouge had killed them all. And even 20 years later, there was only 10 lawyers in the country. So consequently, you'd walk into a prison, and not only would you meet 12-year-old boys, you'd meet women, and you'd say, "Why are you here?" One would say, "Well, I've been here for 10 years because my husband committed a crime, but they can't find him." So it was just a place where there was no rule of law. The first group of defenders came together, and I still remember, as I was training, I said, "Okay, what do you do for investigation?" And there was silence in the class, and finally one woman stood up, Pyong Yo-hip, and she said Nekru, which means teacher. She said, "I have defended more than 100 people, and I've never had to do any investigation because they all come with confessions." And we talked about, as a class, the fact that, number one, the confessions might not be reliable, but number two, we did not want to encourage the police to keep doing this, especially as it was now against the law. And it took a lot of courage for these defenders to decide that they would begin to stand up and support each other in implementing these laws. And I still remember the first cases where they